Hey, welcome folks. This is Ford Fisher and this is Magic the Grappling episode 4, brought to you by manatraders.com and onelioncbd.com. I have a discount code for ManaTraders. It is MOON, M-O-O-N, and you get 15% off for your first 3 months of subscription. So what I wanted to do today was kind of continue off of last week's episode where I was talking about the origins of my fandom with Magic the Gathering. And I'm going to switch over a little bit and talk about the origins of my fandom with pro wrestling. I was born in 1986, and so that made me become a fan right about when I was 4 or 5 years old, at least the first time I remember it. I remember the very first match I saw was on, I think, Superstars, and the very first wrestler I remember seeing was IRS, Erwin R. Shyster, and I'm a little fuzzy, but I'm pretty sure that he was wrestling Mr. Perfect. But thinking about the time and the era that I was in, seeing those guys in the ring against each other wouldn't have been right, I don't think. I think Mr. Perfect might have been a babyface for a short time in WWF, but I don't really remember him, facing off against any other heels. So I could be very wrong on that. When you're 4 years old, you don't remember everything, right? So the very first pay-per-view I remember watching, and now this it was very different back then. Pay-per-view was still in its infancy. So what I did was, as a child at 4 and 5 years old in 1990 and 91, the videotapes, the VHS tapes, I'd go to the local video store. We'd rent videos. I think it was, the name was Primetime Video. And they had what they called dollar days. So every Tuesday, my mom would take me to this place and we'd get to rent a couple of videos, and they were $1 each, which was great. You got to keep them for a week or at least a few days. I can't remember exactly back then. It wasn't, quite Blockbuster back then. And so I got to keep all those videos for a long time, and I watched them all out of sync, and I had no idea, what was going on with the storylines and the progressions and everything. But, when you're 5 and 6 years old, all you want to see is the good guys win and the bad guys lose, right? So the very first show I remember watching in its entirety, and I remember seeing later on in life and thinking, wow, I saw this as a child. It was Survivor Series 1990. Now, this is a pretty pivotal show in a lot of people's fandom. Mainly, it's come up recently. It's because the man retired just recently at Survivor Series 2020, and that's The Undertaker. Survivor Series 1990 was his very first WWF show, and it's been, covered ad nauseum recently, and he thought he was going to be the Eggman because there was going to be this big egg coming out during the show, which ended up being the Gobbledygooker, which is almost, I'd say pretty close to about as legendary of a character as The Undertaker, but a little bit different. Undertaker is famous while the Gobbledygooker is kind of infamous. That's really the first show that I remember seeing, and ironically was one of the last shows of Dusty Rhodes. I think the last big pay-per-view for Dusty Rhodes in the WWF was Survivor Series 1990, and if I remember correctly, The Undertaker eliminated him, and I don't think he was the first one eliminated. I think The Undertaker took out Koko B. Ware first, and then he took out Dusty Rhodes eventually. But I remember the first person he was in the ring with was Bret the Hitman Hart, of all people. What a great show that was. And it's the only Survivor Series that I know of that has had a grand finale match, which you don't see that anymore, and you haven't seen it since. And it's because it's really difficult to book something like that. You had a real clear-cut set of babyfaces and heels in 1990, and you had a clear-cut set of 3 or 4 guys that they wanted to push to be the top people. And so they had Ultimate Warrior and Hulk Hogan, of course. They were the top guys, but they needed a third guy to see if they could break the class ceiling or at least have someone lose on the babyface's side. You can't have 3 babyfaces clean up 9 people or whatever it was. It was like a whole team of heels. It was like at least 6 people on the heel side, and it was a good show. I know I'm kind of stumbling over my words here, but I really, really enjoyed that show, and it's got a special place in my heart. Also, what I wanted to go on with, as I was growing up, of course, I collected. I was in the heyday of the collectibles in wrestling. It seems like, with all the LJN figures and the wrestling buddies, like the kind of pillow type things. Man, I had the Ultimate Warrior at first, and I threw him around and beat him up so beyond belief. My mom had to sew it up a handful of times to the point where they got me the Warrior at first, And then I think the following Christmas, I ended up getting 2 or 3 others. And I know I had $1 Million Man and Big Boss Man, but I don't know if I had Hulk Hogan. I might have. So then, speaking of Hitman Hart, I dressed as him as Halloween for 2 years. And, so, I mean, all the merchandise and the figurines and the things were coming out for children. I was the perfect target, or mark, as you would say. I was the perfect target for this type of product and these type of wrestlers and everything. So, I can't fight it. I mean, it's just what came out. Now, being from Virginia, I was kind of in the middle as far as the territories go. I knew of WCW and NWA, but I didn't get it on my television, at least in my area. And we didn't get cable, until I was 20 years old or so. I never really got to see WCW until they got onto cable. And even then, it was interesting because when I was a kid and 8, 9, 10 years old, that was like 94 to 96, 97. In school, a lot of my friends would say that WWF was fake and that WCW was the real stuff. And I never really understood that until many years later when I looked at the rosters and what was going on with, a fresh set of eyes and a much more mature set of eyes. Seeing that, Duke the Dumpster Drosy and Mantar and like all those terrible gimmicks and Repo Man and all these working man gimmicks and blue collar type characters, it wasn't really working for everybody. And WCW was very different. Eric Bischoff's approach was taking people and using their real names and or something close to it. I don't know. It changed the way wrestling was, but I think a lot of us as children didn't quite understand it. It was something that it was tough to grasp as a child, but I understand it as an adult. It's tough for me to imagine being an adult in that time back in the mid-90s, as far as, in the wrestling world. I just remember standing, I think, what was it, like 4th or 5th grade. I was standing in between the 2 classrooms that we had, and I remember I was kind of bickering and fussing with a couple of friends of mine that one of them thought was, able to announce things better than me. And I wanted to be a ring announcer back then. And I remember trying to imitate Howard Finkel in the 4th grade classroom, trying to fight my friends saying that I was the better announcer and that wrestling was so much better. And then I remember my friend was, doing this to, just to irk me, and they were trying, and it seems like they were just trying to get a reaction out of me. But, I did this whole Howard Finkel introduction, kind of like Heartbreak Kid Shawn Michaels, and went all into it. And then my friend went in and did like a real underwhelming announcement. And I remember my other friend that was judging us, immediately said that my buddy that did such a terrible job was the winner. And I was thinking, man, that's just not right. But that's later on in life, you find out that kids can just be mean and just relentless, and it doesn't really mean anything in the end. But at that moment, it really does to you. And you just have to get over it. That's just what I've come to realize. So, I wanted to go into a little bit of magic and wrestling and how they've evolved and how many similarities there are now. But there are also so many differences in the game and in the sport of pro wrestling. In Magic, the colors didn't really mix so well in the early days. And I don't mean racially. I mean the actual colors on the cards. I don't know if anybody has ever looked at an old Magic card, or really any Magic card these days. If you look at the very back of it, and it has the logo on the top part in the back and, the brown part of the back card, it's got the color, and it's a color wheel. And if you notice it, and I don't have a card in front of me here, but each of the colors, if you look at it, I think white is, like you find white, and you look to the either side of white, and you'll see red and green. Those are the 2 allied colors of white. And same with black. You'll see black, you find black on the card, and you'll see both red and blue, because those are the 2 allied colors. And you'll see the other 2 colors that are the furthest away from any said color that you're looking at. Those are going to be the enemy colors of that said color. The color wheel is or the color pie, I guess you want to call it, is really interesting. And I didn't know that for years. I think I think I probably found that out around 2000, a good 3 or 4 years after I had started playing, what was on the back of that card and what it meant. And I just thought that was really cool. And I tell as many people about that as possible that I see in person these days about Magic, because some people don't know some of the simpler things. Speaking of colors mixing and things like that, the colors mix better now. of course, and they have so many different ways of breaking the color pies and things. Like red cards have trample now, and green cards have first strike, and black cards have lifelink, and it's all kinds of funkiness now. But I kind of like it. It's made for more 3 and 4 color decks and just more variety in the game. And there isn't so much hate among colors, like they've taken protection out of a lot of cards, and now they've changed it to hexproof from certain colors or hexproof from certain types of creatures, or something like that. And the game has really evolved a lot. It's changed from it's just changed a lot from like, what was it, like the way it was worded, like Shroud. Like in the old days, Shroud used to say can't be target of spells or abilities. And then people used to kind of fight that and say, well, it can't be destroyed by Wrath of God. But it's all in the wording. It says can't be the target of spells or abilities. Wrath of God destroys all creatures. And it's not the target when it's just a target. So that's really where the wording of Magic cards comes in. Also wanted to talk about the power creep and just the different ways that cards have gotten better over the years. And, I know I like to refrain or avoid using the words strictly better in a lot of senses, but in this sense, when I explain these cards to y'all, they are just inherently better. And so what I want to talk about was a few cards from the different colors that have changed over the years, and they're just better than everything else. Like you look at an old card from Alpha Beta, all the way up to 4th and 5th edition, Air Element. 2 blue and 3 colorless for a 4/4 flying. Just 4/4 flying, that's it. Now there are 2 other cards in blue that are just the same. It costs the same, and it's 4/4, and it's called Sarah Sphinx. And it's 2 blue and 3 for a 4/4 flying vigilance. And you also got Murder of Crows. I can't even remember exactly what that does, but Murder of Crows is also a 4/4 flying creature for 5 that does extra things. It goes from all kinds of different levels. You got a creature there, and here's a spell. Like in black, you got Terror. Terror was old school. I mean, it's one of the most. I mean, it's one of the original kill spells. I mean, it's an instant, and it killed just about everything. It killed any non-black, non-artifact creature, and it couldn't be regenerated. For a black and 1. That's pretty good. Now, granted, this isn't inherently better because a creature can be regenerated with this next card. It's called Go for the Throat. Now, Go for the Throat is a black and 1 instant that destroys just a non-artifact creature. It cuts the non-black part out, but it does also cut out the can't be regenerated part. At the same time, regeneration kind of has fallen to the wayside in the past 10 or 12 years. I mean, I'd say only a handful of creatures actually have a regeneration ability on it. And so, that isn't really as necessary with Go for the Throat. So, I don't really necessarily think it's inherently better, but about 99% of the time, I'd rather use Go for the Throat than Terror. So, staying on that same vein with the instants, in red, you got Shatter. That's just a red and 1, destroy target artifact instant, right? Pretty good card. It was great back in the day, especially with Moxes and all that other stuff. Now, we got a newer card that came out. I can't remember the set it came out in, but it's came out in the past 3 or 4 years called Abrade. And that's a red and 1 instant. And you get to choose one. Either destroy target artifact or do 3 damage to target creature. I mean, that's a 2-for-1 right there. You don't get to do both, but you get to choose. And, you have the choice. You essentially have 2 cards in one. In that instance. So I don't know why anyone would ever want to use Shatter over Abrade. So that's just my thought on that. Next up is green. Now this is something that has become cheaper. It's not the exact same card because it's actually even better. Now this is an old card. It's called Tranquility. It's a green and 2 and it's a sorcery. So you can only play it on your turn. Destroy all enchantment. Pretty easy. Now the green card that has come out, I think it was like M13, M12, I don't know. So it came out probably about 7 or 8 years ago. Gosh, it's 2021, so almost 9 years ago now. It's called Back to Nature. Instead of it being a green and 2, it's a green and 1. So it's 1 cheaper, and it's also an instant instead of a sorcery, so you can cast it whenever you want. And it also has the same text box. It just says destroy all enchantments. So, I mean, unless a Tranquility is worth more monetarily, if you have an alpha version of it or, like a graded, version of it or something, then yeah, maybe it's worth more. But otherwise, there's really no reason to use Tranquility over Back to Nature in any sense of Magic ever again. And then the very last one was white. It's an old card, Savannah Lions, just a 1 white for a 2/1 vanilla creature, has no abilities. Then later on in the Champions of Kamigawa, the Japanese based sets, you had Isamaru, the Hound of Kanda. That's just a 1 white for a 2/2 vanilla creature. And then it moved on even further. I think it was in a Ravnica revisit. It was something about 6 years ago or so, and it was called Soldier of the Pantheon. And now that's a 1 for a 2/1, and it had protection from multicolor. So anything that was multicolor, it had protection from. And it did something where I think whenever an opponent or whenever you cast a multicolored spell, you gain 1 life. I mean, it's absurd. It was absurd. So, the people call the power creep and the evolution of the game. And some people say in pro wrestling that the evolution of the game is not possible and that it didn't happen and that it's bullshit or whatever it is. I disagree with them, and that's someone like that's highly respected, like Jim Ross. They don't believe that the evolution of the sport of pro wrestling exists, and I disagree to a certain extent. I think the evolution of pro wrestling is that the moves are evolving, but the stories and the characters and different things, they're always going to work. The way that wrestlers look and the way that they act and the way that storylines are told and the way that storytelling is told in the ring, that will always be the same. That will never change. But it's just where I don't know how to explain it, but certain things have changed and certain things haven't. Like the moves, like a DDT and a super kick, things like that used to be the end of the match. Back in like 93, 94, you hit one of those, it was over. And now there are like 100 different variations of DDTs and several different ways of doing super kicks, and you see them 100 times a show. Well, I'm exaggerating. You see them several times a show, and a lot of times it won't be the end of the match unless it's said wrestler's finisher, like say James Storm, with his last call super kick, and other wrestlers with them. Like the Young Bucks, they use them, 5 times in a match, give or take, and it won't get them the finish. But sometimes it might, depending on if both of them kick the guy right in the face, or you never know. So that's one thing I do have to give them on. If they hit him like 4 or 5 times in a match, you never know when is going to be the last one. So the evolution, that's what I really want to talk about, was how the evolution of the game in Magic is more apparent. And in wrestling, well, I don't know. It's in both. It's very apparent. It's just that things in wrestling will always be the same, and I think Magic is going to continue to evolve and going to leave some of the older cards behind. Now, granted, you can't just remake some of the old cards like the Mox or the Moxen, and you can't just remake like the Power 9 and certain things like that. And it's not just because of the reserved list. It's because or the reserve list, reserved or reserve, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. It's not just because of that list. It's just because there are cards that are way too powerful, way too powerful that were back in the day, and like Chaos Orb and all these other things. Yeah, it just is not necessary to be playing. And the anti cards and all that. All those can be left in the past. But one thing that we need to do, and Magic has grasped this really well, and I tell you, pro wrestling has embraced it too, to a certain extent, just nowhere near as much as Magic the Gathering has, and that's inclusion. Inclusion of women, inclusion of gay, inclusion of trans, inclusion of everybody, any and everybody. It doesn't matter what color you are or what gender you are, or whatever it is. Wrestling has been a little bit more resistant to it, and I think they have more of a history of racism and things like that, and holding down other types of people that are not normally socially accepted in certain circles. But Magic has really done a great job of having gay and trans people involved and making them successful, but not also touting them and putting them on a pedestal at the same time. You don't want to patronize people to the point where it kind of alienates them. So you got all kinds of different people in Magic. that are gay and trans. You got Autumn Burchett, Emma Handy, and different people. And then in wrestling, you got Nyla Rose, who's trans, and you got Darren Young and Sonya Deville, who are openly gay, and I love it. It adds other dimensions to both of these products, wrestling and Magic the Gathering, and I love every single bit of it. Now, you have a couple other things like in pro wrestling where they were just trying to be off the wall, like in the 90s with Goldust. It was an androgynous character, and it was and the man playing him was very straight, and that was taboo back in the day, to have that androgynous look and androgynous character. And it was really weird. It was almost like they were trying to upset fans by doing that. And they were, because Goldust was a bad guy. He was a heel. And so now it's interesting because it's changed. Now it's anybody that's openly gay and trans is usually a babyface, except for Nyla Rose. That's a little different. Yeah, she's kind of a monster. So that's really all I got to say about all this today. And of course, what else has been coming up recently has been the protection for wrestlers as far as being in a union and having like a SAG-like group or something like that, and how the WWE Network should at least afford insurance for the people that are on it regularly. I mean, like the guys like Demolition and Legion of Doom, guys that people will recognize for years to come. Even after they've been retired. I mean, some of these people that will recognize who Demolition are and Demolition is weren't even born when Demolition was wrestling regularly. So that's what I love about all this, about this WWE Network and how they could take care of people. I mean, good Lord, they're making at least $10 million a month off of this WWE Network. So that's just something that should happen for the people in the future. I've got a couple other remembrances I wanted to talk about. Of course, we lost two wrestlers recently in the past couple of weeks that just breaks my heart. One of them had a great career and a long life and was known really well throughout the world, and that was Danny Hodge. He was 88 years old. Great. I didn't know much about him. I didn't see him wrestle often. I never have seen very much of his work. But I've seen so many of those videos of him crushing the apples in his hand and shaking other people's hands. And I've heard several stories of the like. And it's just, he was a great wrestler and a great guy. And I'm glad that the Heisman-like trophy is still given. It's called the Danny Hodge Award for amateur wrestlers in college. So, and then the second wrestler that we lost recently was Brody Lee, one of my favorites. And I'm not saying that just because he died recently. In the Wyatt family, I mean, of course, Bray Wyatt was genius, but Brody Lee was someone that made the Wyatt family believable, and I really hope that someone can replicate his big boot one day. I've seen a lot of the discus clotheslines and the different ways that he would do his movements with his hands and things like that, and of course everybody knows how much he loved his family and everything, and he will be missed. He will be greatly missed, and I can't really say much else because I didn't know these guys personally. I hope these guys rest in peace. I wanted to leave y'all with a quotation from someone that died about 5 years ago that was in the wrestling world. His name was Professor Elliot Marin. He was a ring crew man. And he said, he died in late 2015. He said, without the nobodies in professional wrestling, the somebodies would be nobodies. That's very poignant, folks. I really, really hope y'all have enjoyed this episode. I will be back in the next week or so with an interview with a good buddy of mine from the AIWF, the Allied Independent Wrestling Federations. And that's all I got to say about that. This podcast has been brought to you by manatraders.com and onelioncbd.com. Check them out. I use the salve on my feet all the time from One Lion CBD, and it is fantastic. It's like strapping pillows to my feet. I tell you, it is unbelievable. And like I said, the Manatraders promo code will be in the description, and it is MOON, MOON. You get 15% off for your first 3 months of your subscription. Thank you, folks, for listening, and I will see y'all around the bend.